Section 29 of Gray's Anatomy, Part 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Anatomy of the Human Body, Part 1, by Henry Gray. Section 29. The Inferior Nasal Concha, the Vomer. Concha nasalis inferior, inferior turbinated bone. The inferior nasal concha extends horizontally along the lateral wall of the nasal cavity and consists of a lamina of spongy bone curled upon itself like a scroll. It has two surfaces, two borders, and two extremities. The medial surface is convex, perforated by numerous apertures and traversed by longitudinal grooves for the lodgment of vessels. The lateral surface is concave and forms part of the inferior meatus. Its upper border is thin, irregular, and connected to various bones along the lateral wall of the nasal cavity. It may be divided into three portions. Of these, the anterior articulates with the conchal crest of the maxilla, the posterior with the conchal crest of the palatine. The middle portion represents three well-marked processes, which vary much in their size and form. Of these, the anterior or lacrimal process is small and pointed, and is situated at the junction of the anterior fourth with the posterior three-fourths of the bone. It articulates by its apex with the descending process of the lacrimal bone, and by its margins with the groove on the back of the frontal processes of the maxilla, and thus assists in forming the canal for the nasolacrimal duct. Behind this process a broad, thin plate, the ethmoidal process, ascends to join the uncinate process of the ethmoid. From its lower border a thin lamina, the maxillary process, curves downward and lateralward. It articulates with the maxilla and forms a part of the medial wall of the maxillary sinus. The inferior border is free, thick, and cellular in structure, more especially in the middle of the bone. Both extremities are more or less pointed, the posterior being the more tapering. Ossification. The inferior nasal concha is ossified from a single centre, which appears about in the 5th month of fetal life in the lateral wall of the cartilaginous nasal capsule. Articulations. The inferior nasal concha articulates with four bones, the ethmoid, maxilla, lacrimal, and palatine. 5b7. The vomer. The vomer is situated in the median plane, but its anterior portion is frequently bent to one or other side. It is thin, somewhat quadrilateral in shape, and forms the hinder and lower parts of the nasal septum. It has two surfaces and four borders. The surfaces are marked by small furrows for blood vessels, and on each is the nasopalatine groove, which runs obliquely downward and forward, and lodges the nasopalatine nerve and vessels. The superior border, the thickest, presents a deep furrow, bounded on either side by a horizontal projecting ala of bone. The furrow receives the rostrum of the sphenoid, while the margins of the alae articulate with the vaginal process of the medial pterygoid plates of the sphenoid behind, and with the sphenoidal process of the palatine bones in front. The inferior border articulates with the crest formed by the maxilla and palatine bones. The anterior border is the longest and slopes downward and forward. Its upper half is fused with the perpendicular plate of the ethmoid. Its lower half is grooved for the inferior margin of the septal cartilage of the nose. The posterior border is free, concave, and separates the choani. It is thick and bifid above, thin below. Ossification. At an early period the septum of the nose consists of a plate of cartilage, the ethmovomerian cartilage, The postero-superior part of this cartilage is ossified to form the perpendicular plate of the ethmoid. Its antero-inferior portion persists as the septal cartilage, while the vomer is ossified in the membrane covering its postero-inferior part. Two ossific centres, one on either side of the middle line, appear about the 8th week of foetal life in this part of the membrane, and hence the vomer consists primarily of two lamellae. About the 3rd month these unite below, and thus a deep groove is formed in which the cartilage is lodged. As growth proceeds, the union of the lamellae extend upward and forward, and at the same time the intervening plate of cartilage undergoes absorption. By the age of puberty, the lamellae are almost completely united to form a median plate, but evidence of the bilaminar origin of the bone is seen in the inverted ale of its upper border and the groove on its anterior margin. Articulation. The vomer articulates with 6 bones, 2 of the cranium, the sphenoid and ethmoid, and 4 of the face, the 2 maxillae and 2 palatine bones. It also articulates with the septal cartilage of the nose. End of section 29.